These are 13 abandoned ghost towns scattered across the United Kingdom, villages seized by the military, swallowed by the sea, drowned beneath reservoirs, and emptied by forces their residents never saw coming. Some of these places are older than England itself, while others were thriving communities within living memory. And what connects every single one of them is a truth most people would rather not think about. In Britain, ordinary people have been losing their homes to powerful interests for centuries, and almost none of them ever got those homes back. We're covering every corner of the UK today. If you subscribe to the channel, we're starting with what might be the most bitter story of all, a village on Salisbury Plain that the army stole at Christmas. First, Imber, Wiltshire. Imber first appeared in the written record in 967 AD. 1,000 years of farming families lived, worked, and died in this quiet settlement 7 miles from the nearest town. And by the 1851 census, 440 people called it home. A church, a pub called the Bell Inn, a manor house, a school, and a Baptist chapel served a community that had never known anything else. That changed on the 1st of November 1943, when villagers were summoned to the schoolroom and told that American troops needed Imber to practice street fighting ahead of D-Day. 47 days, that's all they got, everyone out by mid-December. About 150 people packed up their lives and walked away from everything they knew. And here's where it turns cruel. The War Office had already purchased all the farmland back in 1932, which meant every person living there was a tenant with no ownership rights and no leverage whatsoever. Testimony from a former soldier named Richard Madigan later revealed that those street fighting exercises never actually took place, and the real reason for the eviction was likely the village's proximity to shell impact zones. A promise was made that villagers could return after the war. Nobody honored it. Austin Underwood, the village schoolmaster, led a mass trespass of over 2,000 people in January 1961, calling Imber a murdered village. The Nugent inquiry that same year sided with the military. Documentary evidence of a return agreement resurfaced in the 1970s, but a Defense Lands Committee review still recommended the Army keep the land. One detail captures the human cost better than any statistic ever could. Albert Nash, the village blacksmith who had stood at his anvil for over 40 years, was found sobbing over it after the evacuation order came through, and he became the first former resident brought back to Imber for burial. The 13th century Church of St. Giles still stands today, restored at a cost of roughly £300,000 in 2008 through the church's Conservation Trust. It carries a Grade 1 listing and contains rare 15th century wall paintings of the 7 deadly sins. Around 16,000 visitors come each year, and the annual Imberbus Day, when vintage London Routemaster buses drive in from Warminster, drew 10,000 people in 2019. But there's no postcode, no electricity, and no running water. Urban warfare training moved to a purpose-built facility at Cope Hill Down in 1988, and none of that mattered because Imber was never returned. 2. Tyneham, Dorset. 40 miles south, almost the same story played out in almost the same month. Tyneham sits in a valley on the Isle of Purbeck in Dorset, near Wharram Bay on the Jurassic Coast. The Domesday Book records it as Tygum, meaning goat enclosure, and the Bond family had owned it since 1683. About 225 people lived in a tight-knit community with no running water and no electricity, and if you needed supplies, you walked 12 miles to Wharram. Every one of those 225 residents received 28 days' notice on the 16th of November, 1943, to vacate for military training ranges. On December the 17th, as the last person walked out, somebody pinned a note to the church door. Evelyn Bond is credited with writing it, and on that very same day she had learned her son Mark was a prisoner of war in Germany. Her words read, "Please treat the church and houses with care. We have given up our homes where many of us lived for generations to help win the war to keep men free. We shall return one day, and thank you for treating the village kindly." None of them returned. Clement Attlee's government admitted in 1947 that the extended firing ranges counted among the War Office's gains from the Second World War. The Bond family received £30,000 in compulsory purchase compensation, roughly £1 million in today's money, while ordinary tenants walked away with virtually nothing beyond the value of their garden produce. Ralph Bond, the last private owner, died in 1951, reportedly grief-stricken, and in 1967, the Ministry of Works demolished the Grand Tyneham House, outraging preservationists, though its east front was salvaged and reconstructed at Athelhampton House. What followed got strange. Publisher Rodney Legg founded a Tyneham Action Group in May 1968. but the organization fractured by 1969 amid allegations involving a press officer named Margaret Kraft, who claimed occult powers and reportedly took credit for a brigadier's death via a curse. Between 175,000 and 185,000 visitors now access Tyneham each year on weekends and school holidays when the ranges aren't firing. St. Mary's Church, parts of which date to about 1190, and the schoolhouse have both been restored as small museums, earning Grade 2 listed status in 2020. Children's names still hang on pegs in the schoolroom, textbooks sit open on desks, and writing remains on the blackboard. Peter Wellman, believed to be the last surviving resident, died in May 2025 at the age of 100. 3. Dunwich, Suffolk, Imber and Tyneham show what governments can do to a village. Dunwich shows what nature can do given enough time. A tiny settlement of roughly 84 to 120 people clings to the Suffolk coast today, but in the medieval period, this same spot housed an international port comparable in size to the City of London, England's sixth wealthiest commercial centre and the capital of the Kingdom of the East Angles. King John granted its charter in 1199, paid partly with 5,000 eels. Around 1250, the city held an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 residents, with 18 ecclesiastical buildings, a royal shipyard, a mint, and a guildhall. Erosion had already begun long before anyone could measure it. The Domesday Book of 1086 noted that over half the taxable farmland had been lost to the sea, making it one of the earliest written records of coastal erosion in Britain. A catastrophic storm struck on the 1st of January 1286, and that was the beginning of the end. Another storm in 1347 swept approximately 400 houses into the waves. The Black Death compounded the devastation, and the soft Pleistocene sediments offered almost no resistance to any of it. All 8 medieval parish churches eventually fell into the sea. The last one, All Saints, lost its tower on the 12th of November, 1919. Mean shoreline retreat has been measured at 0.9 meters per year, and in 1990, 7 meters vanished in a single storm. Professor David Sear of the University of Southampton led a major English heritage-funded project in 2008 that used multi-beam and side-scan sonar to map the seabed. Researchers identified the ruins of St. Peter's Church sitting 337 meters from shore at a depth of 10 meters, along with St. Nicholas's Church, Blackfriars Friary, and hundreds of medieval buildings. Peter Murphy of English Heritage put it this way: everyone was surprised by how much of the eroded town still survives under the sea and is identifiable. Dunwich now holds the title of the largest medieval underwater site in Europe. Local folklore claims church bells can still be heard ringing beneath the waves during storms. The oldest documented account dates to 1859, when a master mariner named John Day reported identifying his position by the sound of a submerged bell, and fishermen would refuse to put to sea when the bells were heard. Henry James captured the mood in 1897 when he wrote, "Dunwich is not even the ghost of its dead self. All the grossness of its positive life is now at the bottom of the German Ocean, which moves forever, like a ruminating beast, an insatiable, indefatigable lip." And a political footnote worth knowing: despite losing virtually everything to the sea, Dunwich retained the right to elect 2 members of parliament until the 1832 Reform Act wiped it off the electoral map as one of Britain's most notorious rotten boroughs. 4. Hallsands, Devon. Dunwich took centuries to disappear. Hallsands took less than a decade, and the cause wasn't natural erosion, but a government-approved dredger. In 1891, 37 houses and 159 people made up a fishing village in Start Bay, South Devon, protected from the sea by sand and shingle banks that had accumulated naturally over millennia. Residents caught crab and pilchard for a living, and the arrangement between land and sea had worked for generations. That arrangement ended in 1894 when plans surfaced to expand Devonport Dockyard. Contractor Sir John Jackson Limited needed vast quantities of shingle, and Jackson had already been blocked from dredging at Exmouth because the landowner there happened to be a major conservative donor with enough political influence to say no. The small owner-occupiers of Hallsands had no such protection. The Board of Trade granted a license in 1896, and dredging began in April 1897 without the villagers even knowing about it. Roughly 650,000 tons of shingle were extracted at about 1,600 tons per day over nearly 5 years. The beach level dropped between 7 and 12 feet, and where the sea had once stopped 70 to 80 feet from the village at spring high tide, it now lapped within 3 feet of people's front doors. Villagers petitioned their MP, Colonel Frank Mildmay, and physically blocked the dredgers in early 1902, which forced the license to be revoked on the 8th of January that year. But the damage was beyond repair. Easterly gales and high tides hit on the 26th of January 1917, and Edith Patey, who was 17 at the time, recalled what happened. All of a sudden, the walls came toppling down, the floor caved in. We could see the white waves foaming underneath the floors. 2 days later, the village lay in ruins. All 79 remaining inhabitants survived. Government Inspector Sir Maurice Fitzmaurice confirmed dredging as the sole cause and recommended £10,500 in compensation. The Treasury countered with £6,000 as a full and final settlement, dismissing the villagers as past masters in squeezing. And then the government suppressed the Fitzmaurice report entirely. Journalist Steve Melia didn't uncover it until 2002, buried in the National Archives. One woman refused to leave the wreckage. Elizabeth Prittijohn, born at the London Inn, lived alone in the ruins for 47 years, from 1917 until 1964, keeping chickens and fishing to survive. She told British Pathé in 1960, "I have all my memories here. Once I thought of moving to Dartmouth, but this is where I belong with my memories." Another resident, Ella Trout, operated her dead father's fishing boat with her sister Patience, and in September 1917, Ella rescued 9 men from the torpedoed SS Newholm and received the OBE. The cultural footprint reaches further than you might expect too, because Damon Albarn revealed on BBC Radio 4 that Hallsands inspired the Gorillaz Plastic Beach album. The ruins are visible from the cliffs but closed to public access since the viewing platform was shut down in 2024 after further landslides. 5. Wharram Percy, Yorkshire. Military force, the sea, and industrial greed have all killed villages. Wharram Percy died from something quieter, the economics of sheep versus grain. Sitting on the western edge of the Yorkshire Wolds about 18 miles northeast of York, this settlement appears in the Domesday Book as Warren, recorded as waste, likely from William the Conqueror's harrying of the north. The village recovered and grew to roughly 200 people by the mid-13th century, with about 40 properties, 2 manor houses, a church, and a corn mill. The Black Death of 1348 to 1349 knocked the population from roughly 67 down to 45, but that blow alone didn't finish the place off. What killed Wharram Percy was a shift in economics during the 15th century, when sheep farming became more profitable than cereal cultivation. The Hilton family, who acquired the manor in 1402, progressively converted farmland to pasture, and between 1488 and 1506, Baron Hilton evicted the last 4 families and demolished their homes. An estimated 3,000 deserted medieval villages survive across England, and Wharram Percy remains the most famous of all of them. Economic historian Maurice Beresford of the University of Leeds visited in June 1948 and realized that the bumps in the fields were actually building foundations. Excavations launched in 1950. Archaeologist John Hurst joined 2 years later, and together they co-founded the Deserted Medieval Village Research Group. 5,000 volunteers worked the site over 40 consecutive summers between 1950 and 1990, making it one of the longest-running archaeological projects in Europe, and yet only 6.5% of the scheduled area was ever excavated. That small fraction yielded 110,000 objects and 687 skeletons. What those skeletons revealed was striking. Many young adults stood no taller than a modern 10-year-old because of poor diet. Women showed significantly more muscle development than their urban counterparts. DNA testing uncovered tuberculosis, and some corpses had been burnt and mutilated before burial, possibly the first scientific evidence in England of medieval communities taking measures to prevent the dead from rising. 6. Hampton Gay, Oxfordshire. Some ghost towns die from a single blow, but Hampton Gay took hit after hit across 3 centuries before it finally gave in. The village sits in the Cherwell Valley, 1.5 miles north of Kidlington in Oxfordshire, reachable only by footbridge. Just 28 people lived there by 1931, and the parish merged with Hampton Poyle the following year. Trouble arrived early. John Barry bought the manor in 1544, and his heirs enclosed the common land for sheep, which meant the people who had depended on that land for survival had nowhere to turn. Starvation drove villagers to join an agrarian revolt in 1596 led by Bartholomew Steer, who planned to murder the landowner Vincent Barry and march on London. Only about 10 rebels gathered at Enslow Hill. 5 ringleaders were arrested, one of them hanged, drawn, and quartered. But the government did acknowledge the grievance, and it led directly to the Tillage Act of 1597. Christmas Eve 1874 brought the next catastrophe, when a packed Great Western Railway train from Oxford to Birmingham derailed after a wheel tire fractured. Carriages plunged down a 16-foot embankment into the Oxford Canal, killing 34 people and seriously injuring 69 more in one of GWR's worst disasters. Paper mill owner Langton Pearson and his workers rushed to help, laying 26 bodies in the mill's storeroom because the nearby church was locked and nobody could find the key. Colonel William Yolen's inquiry led to reforms in wheel design, braking systems, and in-train communications. And then the fires started. The paper mill burned down in November 1875, was rebuilt, and went bankrupt in 1882. The Elizabethan manor house, built in the 1580s with a classic E-shaped plan, burned to a shell on the 29th of April 1887 and was never rebuilt. Today, those manor ruins carry a Grade 2 listing and sit on Historic England's Heritage at-risk register, rated very bad. St. Giles's Church still stands with no electricity and no water, lit entirely by candlelight, and inside you'll find a mid-13th century bell, one of England's oldest, alongside a barrel organ from the 1830s. Monthly evensong takes place there using the Book of Common Prayer. 7. Tide Mills, East Sussex. The name Tide Mills sounds picturesque. In the 1930s, the Daily Mail branded it the Hamlet of Horror. Lying 1.2 miles southeast of New Haven within the South Downs National Park, this settlement exploited a geographical quirk. After a cut redirected the River Ouse in the 1730s, incoming tides kept entering the old channel, creating untapped potential for tidal power. 3 corn merchants took a 500-year lease from the Duke of Newcastle in 1761, and the mill they built opened in 1788 using sluice gates to trap tidal water. William Catt transformed the place when he took over in 1807 to 1808, expanding operations to 16 pairs of millstones producing 1,500 sacks, or 190 tons, of flour every week. Cottages, a school, a blacksmith shop, and a granary all went up under his watch. Catt ran a tight ship as well, locking the village gates nightly at 10:10 p.m., and he even grew pineapples in heated pits that turned out to be among the first excavated pineapple pits in England when archaeologists dug them up in 2006. Everything unraveled after the New Haven Harbor Company purchased the mill in 1879 and cut off ship access. The mill closed in 1883. By the 1930s, conditions had deteriorated to the point of scandal, with a single shared standpipe for drinking water, earth closets emptied directly into the sea, and no electricity anywhere. Seaford Council declared the settlement a clearance zone in 1936 to 1937, and the last residents were forced out by 1939 to 1940. Remaining buildings were then demolished during the war to provide clear fields of fire against a possible German invasion. One earlier episode deserves mention. In 1795, militia soldiers from Blatchington mutinied and stole flour from Tide Mills, and 5 of the ringleaders were executed for it. The site is free to visit today, with foundations, low ruins, mill race sluice arches, and the old railway platform of Bishopstone Beach Halt all still visible. 8. Nant Gwrtheyrn, Wales. Most of the places we've covered remain empty. Nant Gwrtheyrn broke that pattern and came back to life. An isolated valley on the northern coast of the Lynn Peninsula in Gwynedd, accessible only by a steep road locals call Screw Hill. Nant Gwrtheyrn means Vortigern stream. The name traces back to the legendary 5th century king who, according to tradition, fled here after betraying Britain by hiring Saxon mercenaries. A stone grave called Bed Gwrtheyrn existed until at least the 1740s, and when it was opened, it contained a coffin with the skeleton of a very tall man, as Thomas Pennant documented in the 1770s. Granite-set quarrying began in 1851, feeding the streets of industrial cities across Britain, and by 1886 the population had reached roughly 200 people. But tarmac replaced granite sets after the First World War. Demand collapsed, and the quarry closed for good in 1939. The school shut down in 1948, and the last family walked away in 1959. What happened next nearly finished the village off entirely. A hippie commune calling itself New Atlantis squatted in the ruins during the early 1970s, burning floors and doors for firewood and covering the walls in graffiti. That's when Dr. Carl Close entered the picture, a GP who had moved from Christie Hospital in Manchester to the nearby village of Lanael Hairn. His idea was to turn the abandoned settlement into a Welsh-language residential centre, and in July 1978, the Nant Gwrtheyrn Trust purchased the entire village for £25,000. A £5 million redevelopment followed, including £3.8 million from European and Welsh government grants, and the result was a 4-star conference and accommodation centre opened by First Minister Carwyn Jones in March 2011. Over 40,000 students have attended residential Welsh courses since then, and the centre welcomes more than 30,000 day visitors each year. It's the proof that not every ghost town story has to end in silence. 9. Badbea, Caithness. From resurrection to one of the bleakest episodes in British history, Badbea clings to steep slopes above sea cliffs on the east coast of Caithness in Scotland, 5 miles north of Helmsdale, and its name is pronounced Badbea. Starting in 1792, Sir John Sinclair of Ulster evicted tenant families from the fertile valley of Ousdale to clear the land for sheep. Roughly 28 families, between 80 and 100 people in total, were forced onto Badbea over several waves, the largest arriving in 1802 when 12 families came at once. They were handed tiny plots of rough, steeply sloping ground squeezed between dry stone walls and precipitous cliffs, and they were expected to make it work with one horse shared among the entire village, no plow, and soil that had to be broken by hand with a tool called a chabe, while men pulled the harrows themselves. And then the fact that defines Badbea more than anything else. The winds coming off the sea were so violent that women tethered their livestock, their poultry, and even their own children to rocks and posts to stop them being blown over the cliff edge. Heritage sources document this widely, though some accounts describe it as part legend. John Sutherland, known locally as John Badbea, served as village leader, lay preacher, and doctor, and he owned the only watch in the entire settlement. His funeral drew hundreds. Men fished for herring from Berrydale while women gutted the catch and worked the crops, and illegal whiskey stills operated with warning systems to alert villagers when excise officers were approaching. Emigration to New Zealand, Canada, and Australia picked up speed by the 1850s, especially after the laird discontinued herring fishing in favor of salmon and stripped out the community's main source of income. By 1903, the village was effectively empty, and the last resident departed in 1911. A year later, David Sutherland, whose father Alexander had emigrated to New Zealand back in 1838, returned and built a memorial cairn from the stones of John Badbea's house. Roughly 16 to 24 building ruins survive today, free to visit from a lay-by on the A9, and the site has become a popular stop along the North Coast 500 route. 10. Galboly, County Antrim. From Scotland, we cross to Northern Ireland, to a village so well hidden it earned the nickname the Robbers' Village. Galboly, meaning the bright dairy in Irish, hides in the hills above Garran Point on the Antrim coast, perched on a steep mountain plateau that receives only about 3 months of direct sunlight each summer. Getting water to the settlement meant loading creamery churns onto donkeys and hauling them up from the coast road. Griffith's valuation from the mid-19th century recorded roughly 48 houses, and by the 1901 census, 22 houses and 78 occupants remained, mostly farmers. The Robbers' Village nickname allegedly comes from stories of residents descending the hills to rob tourists in jaunting carts on the Antrim Coast Road, though firm evidence to back that up doesn't exist. Agricultural mechanization steadily drained the population, and by the 1950s only 6 people were left. The last resident was Brother Vitor O'Kane, a Cistercian monk from Portglenone Abbey who lived alone in Galboly for decades with no electricity and no running water. He died in 2013 at the age of 73, making this one of the most recently abandoned settlements anywhere in the UK. For viewers of a certain television show, Galboly served as a filming location in seasons 5 and 6 of Game of Thrones, standing in as runestone in the Vale of Arryn. 11. Mardale Green, Cumbria. Back to England now, to the Lake District, and to the village that periodically rises from its own grave. Mardale Green lay in a valley within what is now the Lake District National Park. The Home family, known as the hereditary Kings of Mardale, had settled here around 1208 to 1216, reportedly while fleeing King John. Monks of Shap Abbey established a church in the 15th century, but the churchyard wasn't consecrated for burials until 1729, and before that date, the dead were strapped to pack horses and carried over the Corpse Road road through Swindale to Shap. 76 petitions were filed against the proposal, but the Manchester Corporation Act of the 23rd of December 1919 authorized the Haweswater Reservoir regardless. Construction launched in 1929, halted during the Great Depression, and resumed in the mid-1930s. The dam, described at the time as the world's first hollow buttress dam, stretched 470 meters long and 27.5 meters high with 44 buttressed units, raising water levels by 29 meters. August 1935 brought the last church service, preached by the Bishop of Carlisle, to a capacity crowd of 75, with hundreds more listening through loudspeakers fastened to the church tower. The vicar of 25 years, Reverend H.F.J. Barham, could not bring himself to walk through the door. 2 months later, in October, 97 sets of remains were exhumed and reburied at Shap. Workers dismantled the church stone by stone in April 1937, and the grim irony is that those stones were reused to build the reservoir's water draw-off tower. Royal engineers blew up most of the remaining buildings, using them to test plastic explosives. Around 100 residents lost their homes. The reservoir today holds between 84 and 85 billion liters and supplies roughly 25% of northwest England's water. But Mardale Green keeps coming back. During droughts, stone walls, gateposts, the foundations of the Dunbull Inn, a humped-back bridge, and tree stumps all surface from beneath the water. It has happened in 1976, 1983, 1995, 2003, 2010, 2014, 2018, 2021, and 2022. People come to look every single time, and every single time the water rises again. Alfred Wainwright captured it in 1955. Mardale is still a noble valley, but man works with such clumsy hands. Gone forever are the quiet wooded bays and shingly shores that nature had fashioned so sweetly. The valley once held the only resident golden eagles in England, nesting between 1969 and November 2015, when the last one disappeared. 12. Derwent and Ashopton, Derbyshire. Mardale Green isn't the only drowned village that resurfaces in dry summers. 40 miles east in the Peak District, Derwent and Ashopton share the same fate, but with an extraordinary wartime connection tied to them. Derwent Village held around 50 to 60 residents and centered on the Church of St. John and St. James alongside the Grand Derwent Hall, built in 1672. Ashopton was the busier of the two, home to about 100 people, with an hourly bus to Sheffield, an inn, a post office, and a Methodist chapel dating to 1840. Construction of Ladybower Reservoir began in 1935. Ashopton Chapel held its final service on the 25th of September 1939, closing with the hymn, "The Day's Dying in the West." Derwent Church followed on the 17th of March 1943. 100,000 tons of concrete and over 1 million tons of earth went into the dam, and King George VI officially opened Ladybower on the 25th of September 1945. And this is where the story lifts into something bigger. In 1943, 617 Squadron RAF, the Dam Busters, led by Wing Commander Guy Gibson, practiced low-level flying over Derwent Reservoir before Operation Chastise. Derwent Dam's twin towers closely resembled the German target dams in the Ruhr Valley, and pilots flew Lancaster bombers at just 60 feet, using Aldous lamps to judge their altitude before heading to Germany on the real mission. After demolition, the church spire was left standing as a memorial and eerily protruded above the rising water for over a year. People swam out and climbed it, which forced authorities to dynamite the structure on the 15th of December 1947. The bell survived, rehung at St. Philip's Church in Chaddesden, Derby, and a 17th century packhorse bridge was taken apart stone by stone and rebuilt at Slippery Stones at the head of Howden Reservoir in 1959, where it carries a scheduled monument designation today. The 2018 drought drew unprecedented crowds when the ruins resurfaced. A man had to be rescued from deep mud, and rangers battled vandalism and artifact theft. Severn Trent proposed raising the dam walls up to 20 meters in 2022 at a projected cost of £310 million, a plan that would have drowned ancient forests. But environmental opposition killed it by June 2023. Over 2 million visitors arrive in the Upper Derwent Valley annually. Maurice Cottrell, whose family once lived in Derwent, captured what so many displaced people across all 13 of these stories have felt. People come up to me and say, "Isn't it beautiful around here?" But it's nothing to what it was. It's all man-made now. Outro. What ties these places together matters, particularly if you're someone who pays attention to the character of British communities and where they're heading. Villages don't just vanish, someone decides they should. Whether it's a medieval baron choosing sheep over tenants, a Victorian contractor choosing shingle over fishermen, or a 20th century government choosing a reservoir over a valley, none of these are natural deaths. Every one of them is a choice made by people with power over people without it. The ruins are still out there. Some you can walk through for free, any day of the year. Others only open a handful of days annually, and a few, if you wait for a dry enough summer, will rise slowly from beneath the water, stand in the sunlight for a few weeks, and then slip back under again. Thanks for watching. If any of this held your attention, consider subscribing, and if you've visited one of these places yourself, tell us about it in the comments.